So our two speakers are Vicki Elson and Gordon Edwards. Vicki, do you want to just wave? There she is. Okay, I hope everyone noticed. Vicki Elson is co-founder and creative director of Nuclear Then-U.S. She believes that there's only one way to be truly safe from the danger of nuclear weapons, attacks, and wars, and that's to eliminate every single nuclear weapon from the face of the earth forever, preferably before they eliminate us. Amen to that. We must, she believes, and we can, as in I can. She's excited about the Nobel Prize winning Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, or Nuclear Ban Treaty, an excellent new tool to achieve total global nuclear disarmament. She hopes Canada will soon join the treaty and add to the pressure on the 9 nuclear weapons armed nations to join it as well. Thank you, Vicki. We're looking forward to your talk. Now, Gordon Edwards. Gordon, can you wave? I see you there. Okay, wonderful. Gordon Edwards is a mathematician, physicist, nuclear consultant, and president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, ccnr.org. He's based in Montreal. He's written about the problems with nuclear energy and nuclear disarmament. For an example of his writing on the latter topic, see the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists photo essay, which I will share with you in the follow-up email. So welcome, both of you, and I'll let David take it away, or do we just segue right into Vicki? Vicki, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Are you okay? I'm not. That was really rough. I watched that as a kid when it came out in 1983, and I spent a long time in therapy afterward, as perhaps you did too. Yeah, as it said in the credits, the reality would actually be quite a bit worse. So here in the United States, most people are not aware of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which I consider to be the good news, you know, the hope. So those of you who have your cameras on, can you just wave if you do know what the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is? Okay, and if it's news to you, please wave. If you don't, not too familiar with it. Okay, well, I am, as Kim said, I'm very, very excited about this treaty. I think it's the most hopeful thing that's happened so far, and I'd like to just share with you a little bit about it. And I just really want to thank David and Kim for and Gordon for making this event happen. I think this is really motivating, and now that you're motivated, the question is, what do we do? And that's what I want to talk about. Canada, very different from the US. What we're doing here in the US is we're lobbying Congress to sign the ICAN pledge, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or to support the bill called HR 2850 from our own Washington, D.C. Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, which is about defunding the nuclear weapons entirely, signing and ratifying the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and shifting the wasted resources of money, brain power, infrastructure to green technologies and other pressing human needs. So Canada, bless your hearts, doesn't have nuclear weapons, no longer has any on its soil. And in Canada, you have some incredible strengths. You have 73% of the country who are unafraid to voice their support for the treaty, even under pressure as a NATO country from the United States and other NATO countries. So that's a huge strength. I'm sorry your politicians haven't caught up with that by a long shot, but they must, and we can make that happen. Another great strength that you have in Canada is all the expertise, and a lot of people probably who are here today on this call, and Gordon included, and your Canadian Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And you have Setsuko Thurlow in Canada, who's one of my all-time favorite people. I have a beautiful quote from her. Right after the treaty was adopted by 122 countries at the UN in 2017, she said, "When I was a 13-year-old girl trapped in the smoldering rubble, I kept pushing. and I kept moving toward the light, and I survived. Our light is now the nuclear ban treaty. I repeat those words that I heard called to me in the ruins of Hiroshima. Don't give up, keep pushing, see the light, crawl towards it. So those were some of her words as she accepted the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of ICANN for facilitating the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So I saw this movie, as a young person, and then raised my kids during the 80s, during the Cold War, and I was extremely nervous every night as I tucked them into bed that there might not be a morning. I'm also, I was also worried about nuclear accidents, which are, we've been really lucky so far. We've had maybe 1,000 incidents that could have resulted in nuclear detonation and didn't, just by pure luck. We've had a dozen incidents that were as close a call as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, right now with the situation in Ukraine, we're in a lot more danger than we were even when this movie was made. So the 9 nuclear weapon states and the 24 profiteering corporations that make nuclear weapons are putting the entire world in grave danger. Nuclear weapons, of course, are being used to bully other countries. It's a major power statement to have nuclear weapons, and the U.S. used them to bully its way into invading Iraq unprovoked, and Russia is doing the same in Ukraine. There were extraordinary efforts in the 80s that I really admire. The freeze movement, the nuclear free zone movement. And I think that those, along with this movie and probably a lot of you and a lot of good people divesting and demonstrating and putting pressure on their politicians, I think that did keep us going through the 80s. It really increased our chances. But it didn't end the problem. We didn't get rid of nuclear weapons altogether. And then the next generation kind of didn't even, register it. So we're in the position now of having to wake people up to this is still a thing, it's still a danger. In 1968, we had the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is still meeting every 5 years. It's meeting right now at the UN. And every 5 years, the nuclear countries pretend that they're going to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and then they don't. They said in good faith at an early date, an unequivocal undertaking, and they're not doing it. So we need to have, so much more pressure on our politicians. So on July 7th, 2017, I was just a nervous grandma, and I was trying not to think about this stuff. And I had a whole other career going on, and I was, just being a grandma. And I went on a date and my date took me to the UN. It was our 4th date. And I witnessed the moment when 122 countries agreed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And there were people in the room who, like Setsuko, who had survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I was so moved to be around with them. And the people in the room, I was in the cafe, but I kind of could see what was going on video. The people who were in the room broke all the UN rules about decorum. They were cheering and jumping up and down and taking selfies. And it was really an ecstatic moment. So after that, I said to my date, well, what are we going to do to promote this thing in the United States, which started this nightmare and continues, propagating it hand over fist to this day. And so we started nuclearban.us to put pressure on the companies, to lobby our legislators. I was just so moved that the world got together and said, we've had enough. This treaty didn't come from the nuclear countries like the Non-Proliferation Treaty and other treaties. There were only 5 countries when the NPT was started, and now there are 9. That's how well it's worked. So this is the rest of the world saying, no, enough already on this. And then the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, of which probably a lot of you and we are a part, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And 2/3 of the world's countries have expressed support for this treaty, including early on North Korea. Most people don't know that. I think that's kind of promising. You know, nuclear weapons are very, very expensive, and they're very dangerous to have on your soil. And there are a lot of reasons to get rid of them besides the cost. You know, there's survival of the species, obviously. So now 86 countries have signed the treaty, 66 have ratified it as of this moment, about 9 more are about to come on. The treaty was led by Austria, Ireland, Mexico, South Africa, and a lot of countries in the global south. It's a young people's movement around much of the planet. So the differences that in the TPNW that make it new and a game changer are that it's not arms control, it's not non-proliferation, it's abolition of nuclear weapons, solving the problem once and for all from the face of the earth forever. And again, it comes from the whole world, not from the nuclear weapon states. The idea being that if enough countries join it, it'll put so much pressure on the nuclear weapon states and on the companies that can't do business in those countries because they're breaking international law in the ratifying countries. You know, if we have enough pressure, that it will eventually, you know, force the nuclear countries to negotiate and figure out a way to completely disarm. So again, nuclear weapons are illegal in the ratifying countries, like chemical and biological weapons. And those countries just met in Vienna to talk about, well, how are we going to enforce this? What are going to be the national legislations that we pass to enforce this? And in Ireland, they have life in prison as a sample punishment for people engaging in nuclear weapons, anything to do with them. Possibly even including financing them in some countries, you know, so, you know, having them supporting their manufacture in any way, shape, or form. You know, they're taking it very, very seriously. The TPNW includes victim assistance and environmental remediation. And it's a process that began with the humanitarian consequences, like what we all just witnessed in this movie. It did not begin with politics or power. It began with the humanitarian impact, with the fact that there is no meaningful medical response. And the Hibakusha, like Setsuko, the survivors of nuclear war and nuclear weapons and testing and manufacture, where it's poisoned land and water and people have died from uranium mining. You know, those indigenous people mostly and people of color played a huge role in the negotiations for the treaty, which was a really beautiful and important part of it. So it changes the conversation about nuclear weapons. It validates total abolition as what the world demands and what the world can achieve. It sets a really high bar. It's not risk reduction, it's eliminating this risk forever. And it gives us a lot of clout when we're talking to politicians, to corporations, to the press, to financial institutions. It's really a game changer. So it shames and stigmatizes the nuclear weapons companies. It reinforces the international norm that treats nuclear weapons as utterly unacceptable to the civilized world. The more countries join, again, the more global pressure on the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons. It also shames and stigmatizes the profiteers. They're under legislative risk now, as they call it, in the ratifying countries. You know, corporations lobby politicians and they spend a lot of money on their elections and they have a revolving door for jobs. That's not okay. You know, they get a 450,000% return on their investment when they contribute to campaign funds, as reported by public citizens. So we can use the TPNW to get people and institutions to divest and put pressure on the companies that way. I know Canadians are doing a lot about divestment from the nuclear weapons industry, as is don'tbankOnTheBomb.com, a wonderful resource. I saw that Susie Snyder from Don't Bank on the Bomb is in one of your upcoming events. That's fantastic. We're hoping that the corporations will then ask governments to help them convert to green technologies and pressing human needs. And it worked in the 80s. It worked on GE, GM, Morton, Ford, DuPont. Again, we should have continued, but this kind of pressure really can work. So I was very excited with the meeting of states parties that just happened in Vienna. 634 ICANN members in 107 countries. A lot of them were there. UN agencies were there. The International Committee for the Red Cross and the Red Cross Red Crescent movement people were there to discuss, again, how to make reparations, remediation, national enforcement, and gaining more states parties to the treaty. So what we've been doing, trying to figure out what to do. One of the things, we've tried showing up at nuclear weapons bases and corporations in outfits that say treaty compliance unit and having that kind of nonviolent direct action. We showed up at shareholder meetings and talked to CEOs. I recently got to put a copy of the treaty in the hands of the CEO of Northrop Grumman, which made my day. Also made me very nervous, and that she would not read it. We do educational events. We encourage divestment at every level. We encourage hospitals to boycott the nuclear weapons companies that also make nuclear devices for hospitals. We encourage legislation at every level. New York City, by the way, if you haven't heard, has just divested its pension funds, or is about to, from the nuclear weapons industry. So that's something we can celebrate. And we're really struggling to get the media on board. I don't know about Canada, but in America, this is not in the paper. They talk about the NPT once in a while. They talk about all the nuclear threats and all the saber rattling, but they don't talk about the fact that we have this treaty that could solve the problem. So that's something that's very, very important, is to get the media to cover this. And maybe you'd have better luck in Canada than we have here. We'd sure appreciate that. So right now what we're doing is we're lobbying Congress to sign the ICANN pledge and or co-sponsor the bill I talked about from Eleanor Holmes Norton. And my favorite current event is while the treaty meeting was happening in Vienna, we had a press conference in front of the Capitol building here with 5 members of Congress talking about nuclear abolition. And it was live streamed to Vienna so that people working on the treaty there could see that not every American member of Congress is a warmonger, that there are actually a handful who really support the treaty. And we're really hoping to expand that number with a lot of lobbying in the coming year. So what you can do, I'm really excited to hear what Gordon has to say about what's going on in Canada and what you can do there. There are many organizations, World Beyond War being one of them, and nuclearban.us, if you want to check in and see what we're doing here, check it out. But it just seems like the only thing to do really is get Parliament on board with what the citizens want. The disparity between what you want and what they want is so extreme. And it's the same in the US. The donors have a lot more power than the voters. We have to change that. We have to fix that. So I would say make yourself really a nuisance to your Parliament and take advantage of all the great people you do have in your government who are in favor of Canada joining the treaty. So that's my fervent wish, is for Canada to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, get the other NATO countries on board, put pressure on the US. We don't want to have a remake of this movie in real life. And, so all the best. I love Canada. I want to tell you, I wrote a song during a certain election a few years ago that put the fear of God in me. And it's called Don't Move to Canada. And it was aimed at Americans, like, okay, don't move to Canada, stay here and fight, stay here and dance. And now I'm kind of feeling like maybe we should move to Canada, but I just want you to know that, we hold Canada as the place that has socialized medicine and doesn't start wars. And we really admire you and love you. And really, those of us in the peace movement are really glad to have partnership with the good people of Canada. Thank you.
David, you talk. You don't say enough.
I was about to ask if we should go to Gordon. Shall we go to Gordon? Hi there. Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I don't want to use up all the time because we have questions and answers, no doubt. I'd like to point out that when it comes to global issues, whether it's human rights, whether it's war, whether it's nuclear weapons, whether it's the environment, it's really the grassroots that have to provide the leadership, because our leaders are locked into this mentality that they are only care about the territory of their country, which has borders and which basically makes the world look like a flat earth rather than a round earth, which we know it is. And it's really us, the people, who really have to mobilize and get these things done. And in order to do that, we have to understand what are the obstacles and what are the opportunities. And so first of all, I'd like to point out that take the environment, for example, the 1970, the first Earth Day, had a terrific impact worldwide. And in the West, it certainly led to the creation of departments of environment for the first time and environmental assessments for the first time. These things wouldn't exist were it not for the energy that was manifested by ordinary people on that first Earth Day. When it comes to climate change, you think about the mobilization of people and how somebody like Greta Thunberg, how she can inspire people by large numbers. And the government starts shivering and figuring that they have to act, they have to do something because there's just too many people up in arms about it. That's what we have to do with nuclear weapons. We haven't succeeded in doing that yet. However, back in the old days when they were doing atmospheric testing in the United States and elsewhere, people were really manifesting against the effects of radiation on their children, on the unborn fetuses of pregnant women and so on. And it was the manifestation of the public will that really led to the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which stopped atmospheric testing altogether. And interestingly enough, the United States stopped testing unilaterally without an agreement from the Soviets at that time. And then the Soviets followed suit with a unilateral halt on testing on their side. And it was only 2 years later that this was formalized in a treaty. So when people say that unilateral action doesn't make any sense, in many cases, it's the only thing that makes sense, because the main motivation for having nuclear weapons is the fact that other people have nuclear weapons. And somebody has to make the first step. So somebody has to have the wisdom and the foresight to take that step. And by the way, it was also millions of people manifesting in New York City against nuclear weapons and the movie The Day After, which led Reagan and Gorbachev, when they met in Reykjavik, to come very close to agreeing to completely abolish nuclear weapons. They came within an inch of it. And it was the advisors, the American advisors and the Soviet advisors, who were freaking out because the leaders were very close to banning nuclear weapons altogether. So we have to realize that it's really up to us to keep the pressure on. We have to provide the leadership, and we all have to play a part in that. And that means we have to join some of the many organizations that are open to us. I'd like to use an analogy. We talk about the media, and granted, the media would be helpful, but they're not necessary. I mean, there are countries that had no access to free media. Take the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union came apart at the seams just through word of mouth and through people organizing without the support of the media. Take a look at apartheid and how it was overthrown without the support of the media. Just because you don't have a media that's responding, it means that you have to make the media respond by having public events which are so significant that the media can't ignore them. So it's not a question of arguing with the media, it's a question of showing them with large numbers. And I think that that's what we have to aim for. With regard to Canada signing the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of course, the biggest single obstacle to that is NATO. NATO just recently had its policy restated. And their policy is that they would be the first to use nuclear weapons. If they got into a fight where conventional weapons were not sufficient to win the day, they would be the first to use nuclear weapons. That's scandalous. And there should be a tremendous outcry about this. And even when President Biden wanted to move towards a no first use policy, he was immediately contradicted by his advisors, the military advisors and so on. So it really requires a tremendous public energy to overcome this what the IPPNW back in the old day, IPPNW being the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, they won the Nobel Prize in 1985. They did a very good job of not only telling people about the dangers of nuclear war and taking full page ads out, paid ads in newspapers saying that, you know, if there is a nuclear bomb on a major city, don't look to us doctors to help you. We're going to be dead or disabled, and the hospitals are going to be demolished. There is no help. The only help is prevention, and prevention means abolition. And they were very strong on that, but they also didn't only deal with the negative, they also dealt with the positive. They pointed out, for example, that the entire world was successfully eliminated smallpox from the world. And the cost of doing that was just a few days of the arms race. Just a few days of money gone to the arms race was sufficient to eliminate smallpox. They also said that clean water, providing clean water around the world, would only cost the equivalent of about 2 months of the arms race. We have the United States, for example, now committed to spend $1.9 trillion over the next 10 years. That's an average of $190 billion a year. Imagine what that money could be used to do. And this is the kind of argument we have to bring to people. It's not only fear, but also opportunity. Same thing with climate change. You know, it's not just fear of climate change, it's the fact that we can have a better world. If we had a world that was fueled with renewable energy, it would be a more peaceful world. It would be a more prosperous world. It would be an environmentally cleaner world. Similarly, with the nuclear weapons, it's important to stress the positive advantages. The IPPNW, I thought, had a great insight when they compared the possession of nuclear weapons to an addiction, like an opioid addict. That you can't just talk an addict out of his addiction. You need a support group, and this support group are all the non-nuclear weapons countries who have signed on to this treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We should regard these countries as being a kind of a support group to the heavily addicted nuclear weapon states, and that we should be working together to try and free them of that addiction and getting them to kick the habit, you might say. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time, but the goal is the fate of the earth. So what could be more important? And it's also important to realize that technologically, just as in the case of climate change, where it's nice to know that there are technological alternatives, there are renewable energy and conservation and geothermal, wind and solar, and they're cheaper and faster to implement than any of the other alternatives. So we know that there are technological opportunities there. Similarly with nuclear weapons, we know that we know how to stop the continuation of the nuclear arms race. For example, back in 1978, our then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who's the father of the current Prime Minister, made a speech at the United Nations on the special session on disarmament. And he said that we have to adopt, to begin with, a strategy of suffocation. We have to suffocate the vital oxygen upon which the arms race feeds. And what he was referring there to was the 2 strategic nuclear elements that are necessary to make any nuclear weapon of any description. And that is highly enriched uranium and plutonium. And if you stop the production of those things, then you have put a bar, you put a limit. It's equivalent to stopping the slave trade before you abolish slavery. If you stop the trade in the materials that can make nuclear weapons, then you're on your way towards the possibility of eliminating the nuclear weapons themselves. So it's not accomplishing the whole job, but it's a step in the right direction. So I think that I don't want to go on any longer because I want people to be able to ask their questions and get some answers. But I want to tell people, I said I was going to make an analogy and I didn't make it. Here it is. The power of the bomb is not coming from the splitting of a single atom. It's coming from the splitting of trillions of atoms. One splitting produces 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16. And that all happens in 1/10,000th of a second. And that's the power of the atomic bomb, this doubling and doubling and redoubling. If you put this into a social context, It means that if you personally could only influence in your whole life just 2 people who would be activated and inspired to similarly influence 2 other people, and they to influence 2 other people, you would start a chain reaction in society. And the power of this chain reaction is really incredible. And as a mathematician, I vouch for it. This is why, for example, they outlaw pyramid schemes. But pyramid schemes which don't work with money, they work with ideas. And so let's start our own pyramid scheme. Every single one of us can be an initiator. We can be the first atom to split and influence those around us to spread that splitting throughout society. And the splitting that we want to achieve is to divide ourselves away from the path of destruction, nuclear weapons and climate change. Let's get off it and start relishing the world we have, because what we're really facing here is an evolutionary crisis. It's a crisis in the evolution of life on Earth. And sometimes if you put it in that context, people respond much better. That's it. Good.
Wonderful presentations from Gordon and Vicky. Wonderful film. We have somewhere under 15 minutes left if we choose to respect people's time with the ending time of the event. I've narrowed its questions down to my favorite 16. Needless to say, we will never get to them all. And I want to take 10 seconds to say that, yes, in fact, we are aware of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even if they've not been mentioned. And the purpose of this event is not to suggest that US lives matter more than Japanese. In fact, it's timed for those anniversaries, as was the event we did yesterday in Washington, D.C., and the big event we're doing on Tuesday, and so forth. So first question, is it possible that without this film, we wouldn't be here? And what was this film's impact on Reagan? We hear about the impact of the rally in Central Park 40 years ago. Helen Caldicott talks about her personal impact on Reagan. Seems that there was countless cultural factors. What was the impact of this film in particular?
Who are you directing that to?
To Gordon or Vicky? Or
well, I could just say, I don't think we know the answer to that. I think there are multiple causes and multiple effects. And, you know, I learned a long time ago that you can accomplish wonderful things if you don't insist on taking credit for it. And if you don't, you know, I don't think we should think of ourselves as masterminds. We should think of ourselves as influencers. And all of these things combine to influence. There's no doubt that Reagan underwent a profound change in perspective. And I think all of these things had their role to play.
Unless Vicky wants to comment, I'll go to the next question.
If I might just say one other thing, I don't mean to dominate, but when International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War was formed, they included the private physicians of Reagan and the private physician of Gorbachev. And those private physicians talked to those leaders in the medical room when they were doing checkups. And so they individually had a unique opportunity to have an influence as well. But no single influence necessarily brings the result out. It takes a coordinated effort. We're all in this together. We're all in the soup, and we all got to do our part.
Another question asked by many people, is it possible that a day after 2022 remake could help wake us all up again, or getting someone to show the original existing film as we just did? And one might expand on that to ask, is there any US corporation or Western corporation or any company with money anywhere in the world that would fund the creation of such a thing? Is there a US network that would air it? Are there actors who would go through being denounced as Russian propagandists? Is there any network that everyone watches and that half the population of a country doesn't consider the enemy, etc.?
Vicky, you want to tackle that?
That's a really tough question. I'm going to have to think about it. I don't have an answer to that. I think that fear is a really, really, really good motivator, but it's not enough by itself. You know, we have to talk about solutions and hope. And I also saw that there was a question in the chat about hope, you know, and I tell you, it's a really tough time to be a grandma. And the way that I personally cope with it, now that I realize that my therapist was wrong when she said, stop thinking about it so much, you know, the way I personally cope with it is I put myself into trying to do something, you know, whatever seems like it's going to be effective. And I loved what Gordon said about not taking credit for it. You know, We all just have to choose what we think is the most effective thing to do and put time into it.
Hmm.
And, and get our friends involved and talk to them. And so, yeah, I'm really, really happy that the way that this event today was designed was first like, oh my God, we have to fix this. This is real, and using fear as a profound motivator, but then balancing that. I like to balance it always at least 50%, maybe a lot more, with hope and concrete actions that people can take. If we all invent brand new actions, that's great. And it's also great if we all join together, when we see something that seems good, like it's going to be effective, to let go of our individual credit and I'll jump in together.
I had an interesting comment years ago that got me started. This gentleman was a well-known and world-renowned mathematician who is also a complete pacifist. And he said, I said, well, isn't it kind of difficult or impossible for a single individual to have an effect? And he said, well, how do you know what effect you can have? The scientific method is you do an experiment and you see what the results are. So let's be scientists. Let's experiment and see how much power we do have. Let's start talking it up among our friends. They have friends too, and they have friends. And, we're all linked together ultimately as a human community. And you never know what kind of ripple you send out might have effects that you never have any idea what effects those are. So you got to start those ripples going. And it's your responsibility to do what you can. You may be just a small frog in a little pond, but that doesn't mean you can't send out a good splash.
The movie ended with a text telling us that the reality was probably much worse. And there were comments in the chat wondering how much did they really know about a nuclear winter? Would the reality actually be much worse even than they knew, much less than what they depicted? I wonder, because New York City tells me if you just go indoors, you'll be fine. So what's the deal? How much worse would it be?
It can be very bad. The nuclear winter thing is very important. The point is that even if you had a limited nuclear war, say between India and Pakistan, for instance, unfortunately, involving just a couple of dozen nuclear weapons on each side, that's just a couple of dozen bombs each, that could set such clouds of soot into the air. And these calculations have been carried out. I even have an animated graphic I could show you for that. This alone would cause a severe shortfall in food production all over the Northern Hemisphere and would cause starvation and economic dislocation. That's just a limited nuclear war. When we talk about nuclear winter, we're talking about a real large nuclear war between the superpowers, let's say. In that case, you would have freezing temperatures. The sun would not get through the murk for years. And this would lead to the elimination of many species of plants and animals. And certainly the consequences of nuclear winter are extremely grave. We have not only the blast, which destroys the city core and flattens buildings. You have the heat wave, which sets on fire anything that is flammable within a certain radius. And then you have the radiation, which has its immediate effects. And then you have the electromagnetic pulse, which deadens all the electrical systems. And then you have, and communication systems. And then you have the fallout, which creates long-term effects of cancer and so on. So, and then you have the nuclear winter on top of all that. So it is really a devastating thing. And I think that we just tend to, we got to change our language. We got to stop calling these things weapons. They're not weapons. They're suicide machines. And nuclear war is not a war. A war means you have a winner and a loser. But as Gorbachev and Reagan said, and which has been repeated recently, in a nuclear war, there are no winners. A nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. Why? It's not a war. It's a mutual suicide pact. And people have to wake up. I think if we change the language, it will help. Instead of using nuclear war, you should call it nuclear annihilation. Instead of calling them weapons, you should call them suicide machines. We have to start using more dramatic language to break it out of the ordinary. As Einstein said, the splitting of the atom has changed everything except our way of thinking. And thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe.
can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Yes.
If everybody here, we have 700 people signed up and we have just short of 200 people right now here in the chat. I'm going to send you a to-do list, which is going to have events, links, actions you can take. And if everyone here takes at least 5 actions, and I mean, these aren't big actions. These are things like writing a letter or signing a petition or speaking to a friend. If you take just 5 of these actions, we can have an exponential effect. And I really think that yeah, it's not nice to be watching a scary, depressing, grim movie, but the idea is that I was at a vigil last night for Hiroshima, and I was talking to another activist friend as we walked away, and she was sort of remembering that our one of our MPs had a parliamentary petition for the abolition of nuclear weapons, and it got like a few thousand signatures over a long, long time. And then I said, these banal petitions get thousands of signatures in no time at all. She said, yeah, I remember one where there was a petition for medicine, free medicine for menopause, which isn't even an illness between you and me. So we were like, why can't we get action for the important things like stopping ourselves from annihilating our life on Earth? You know, why can't we get the action? So I hope everyone here will make a little, not public, but private commitment to yourself to take some actions. Thanks. That's all I have. That's my public service announcement. That's all I have to say.
I'll also just throw in here that if anybody wants to contact me, we have many resources too. It's www.ccnr.org. www.ccnr.org. That's Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility. And I will respond to any email that I get from anyone.
I am confident that Sim will email everyone that link and every other possible link. And maybe we can squeeze in 1 or 2 more questions if possible. There was a question, a couple questions about the TPNW. One, is prohibition possible given that people can keep secrets and engage in smuggling and so forth? And another I'll throw in there is, are there other steps that we would like, such as taking the weapons off the missiles like some countries do, or getting rid of the land-based ICBMs as a first step, et cetera? Is it ban all the damn things or nothing?
Well, personally, I believe, well, Vicky,
I'll
just say personally that I think that the sponsor of this episode is Beyond War, World Beyond War. And you know what? It's war we have to get rid of. War is the largest threat. It used to be that nature was the largest threat. Animals were the largest threat. Other humans were, of course, now the largest threat. We are our own worst enemy. And it's not just nuclear weapons. The advent of nuclear weapons is the most powerful, quote unquote, weapon in the arsenal. And everybody who has any intelligence believes that if we don't get rid of these weapons, they're going to get rid of us. Because sooner or later, any war anywhere in the world can turn into a nuclear war. And nobody knows how to stop a nuclear war once it starts, because the electromagnetic pulse makes communication. So you can't tell what's going on. And you have to react. You have to either use them or lose them, as they say. And consequently, you have Armageddon in a flash without any meaning to it. This could be even accidental nuclear war. So we really have to work on this. But really, we have to get rid of war as an institution. Armies themselves should be illegal. You know, we should aim for a world without war, and we have to be serious about it. We can't think of it as pie in the sky. Look at how much money we're spending on armaments compared with the good of mankind. We're spending far more, not only money, but brains. We're spending engineers, scientists, CEOs, whatever. We're spending our intellectual capital as well as our financial capital on how best to destroy each other.
Very, very, very well said. As we're out of time, maybe Vicky would like to comment as well.
Oh, I just want to say it's pretty hard to hide having nuclear weapons. It's hard to cheat.
Yeah.
The IAEA is keeping track. We've got satellites, we've got seismographs. So it's actually, they're very expensive. It takes a lot of infrastructure. So it would be hard to cheat. And then as to the question of all or nothing, is it total abolition or nothing? This is something we struggle with a lot. But I believe that if what we ask for, if we set the bar at total abolition, we're more likely to get intermediate steps than if we set the bar at some intermediate step. And then they give us less than that, and it's not enough. The only way to really truly be 100% safe is total abolition. So that's what I'm putting my energy into. I just don't personally want to spend a lot of energy on other steps. But what would happen if we all joined the TPNW is we take the warheads off the delivery systems. That would be the very first thing. And that would make me sleep a whole lot better at night.
Yeah, I do think total abolition has to be the goal, because it's the possession of nuclear weapons by others that is the main incentive for nuclear weapons to be sought. For example, Finland and Sweden have just joined NATO, and now they're changing their long-standing position of against nuclear weapons. They're now saying that in order to join NATO, we have to be in favor of nuclear weapons, because the NATO policy is that they regard nuclear weapons as essential for security.
NATO is
Now,
a
what kind
terrorist.
of message is that sending to the world? It's
NATO
telling
is a
every
terrorist
tin pot
organization.
dictatorship that they have to have nuclear weapons for their own security. So it's crazy. It's literally Alice in Wonderland. And we, the people of the world, really have to figure out how to cry out about this and make sure that the insanity of it is clear.
Extremely well said by Vicky and Gordon. Wonderful. We are over time, by the way.
I just want to say thank you, David, for your patience with the whole process of organizing this. And thank you, Greta, wherever you are, the coordinator of World Beyond War. She's just amazing, and she's very meticulous, and she was a big help. Thank you, Melanie, for your patience and your willingness to do all this, and for organizing all these other exciting events that we've got coming up, which I will send the links in a follow-up. And thank you, Arthur, for your enthusiasm and all your help along the way. And I hope I remembered everyone, but everybody. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Gordon. And really, it was wonderful. I think we're onto something, and I think this is the beginning of a movement, or the continuation with more force of a movement, I should say.
Thanks to all the people who tuned in.
Yes, thank you all for being here and for caring. Very important.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.